The sun was setting at Los Angeles International Airport as Dr. Maya Richardson walked towards the private terminal. Her long day of business meetings had left her tired, but she still carried herself with quiet confidence. She wore simple black pants, a comfortable blue sweater, and flat shoes. Practical clothes for a day that had started at 5 a.m. with emergency patient calls. Maya checked her phone again, reading the urgent message from Chicago General Hospital. They needed her there by tomorrow morning for a complex brain surgery that only she could perform. As one of the country's top neurosurgeons and the owner of Richardson Medical Technologies, flying by private jet had become necessary for her busy schedule. Time could mean the difference between life and death for her patients. The private terminal was quieter than the main airport, its glass walls reflecting the orange California sunset. Inside, well-dressed business people sat in comfortable leather chairs, typing on laptops or talking quietly on phones. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and soft classical music played in the background. This had been Maya's routine for the past 5 years. Same terminal, same friendly staff, same efficient service. Walking up to the security desk, Maya reached for her ID and terminal access card. Her company jet was already waiting on the tarmac, fueled and ready for the 4-hour flight to Chicago. Her pilot, Captain James Wilson, had called earlier to confirm the flight plan and weather conditions. Everything was set for a smooth departure. Maya noticed a new face at the security desk, a guard she hadn't seen before. He was a middle-aged white man with graying hair and a stern expression. His name tag read Thomas Wells. As she approached, Maya gave him her usual friendly smile, the same one she gave to all her hospital staff and employees. "Good evening," she said, holding out her credentials. The ID clearly showed her photo, name, and title: Dr. Maya Richardson, CEO of Richardson Medical Technologies. Her terminal access card displayed her private jet's registration number and her status as a regular client. Thomas Wells didn't reach for her ID. Instead, he looked past her, as if expecting someone else to appear. His eyes scanned the terminal entrance, then returned to Maya with obvious suspicion. The friendly smile on Maya's face didn't fade, though she noticed his strange behavior. She'd faced similar situations before in her career, but never at this terminal where she was well known. "Can I help you?" Wells asked, his tone suggesting she might be lost. He barely glanced at the ID she still held out, his hand resting near the security phone on his desk. Behind him, other passengers, mostly white executives in business suits, were being waved through with quick nods and minimal ID checks. Maya took a deep breath, keeping her voice calm and professional. "Yes, I'm here to board my jet. It's the Richardson Medical Technologies aircraft on Tarmac B. I have a surgical case early tomorrow morning in Chicago." She placed her ID and access card on the desk, sliding them toward Wells. Wells looked at the cards, then back at Maya, disbelief clear on his face. "This private terminal is for aircraft owners and authorized personnel only," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "The main terminal is in the next building." As he spoke, Maya noticed Sandra Chen, a terminal employee she'd known for years, walking past with a coffee pot. Sandra did a double take when she saw Maya standing at the security desk, clearly recognizing the unusual situation. Regular staff knew Dr. Richardson well. She was one of their most frequent flyers and had even performed emergency surgery on Sandra's mother last year. Maya remained patient but firm. "Yes, I understand this is the private terminal. I'm Dr. Maya Richardson, and that's my company's jet on the tarmac. I'm a regular client here." She pulled out her phone, ready to show additional proof of ownership and her flight plan. Wells reached for his security phone, his face hardening. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. We have a situation here," he announced loudly, drawing attention from nearby passengers. Some began to pull out their phones, sensing the tension in the air. Maya stood her ground, her heart beating faster but her exterior remaining calm. 5 years of flying from this terminal, saving countless lives with her skills, building a successful medical technology company, and now she had to prove she belonged here, all because of a guard's prejudiced assumptions. The tension in the private terminal grew thicker as Thomas Wells spoke into his security phone. "I have someone here trying to access the private aircraft area," he said loudly, his eyes fixed on Maya. "She's being difficult." His emphasis on the last word made several nearby passengers look up from their phones and laptops. Sandra Chen, the terminal employee who had recognized Maya earlier, quickly put down her coffee pot and rushed over to the security desk. Her face showed clear worry as she approached. Sandra had worked at the terminal for 8 years and knew exactly who Dr. Richardson was, not just as a client, but as the surgeon who had saved her mother's life last year. "Mr. Wells," Sandra started, her voice urgent but professional. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. This is Dr. Richardson. She's one of our most valued." Wells cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Ma'am, please return to your duties. I'm handling a security situation here." He didn't even look at Sandra as he spoke, his attention still focused on Maya and the phone. More passengers had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. Some had their phones out, recording quietly. Through the terminal's glass walls, Maya could see her jet waiting on the tarmac, its engines ready for the urgent flight to Chicago. Her patient's life depended on her arriving on time for tomorrow's surgery. "Mr. Wells," Maya said calmly, though her patience was being tested, "I understand you're new here, but I've been flying from this terminal for 5 years. My company jet is registered here. I have all the necessary documentation." She reached into her bag and pulled out additional papers: aircraft registration, company ownership documents, and her medical license. Wells looked at the papers with obvious skepticism. "Anyone can print fancy documents," he said dismissively. "Listen, if you don't leave the area, I'll have to call law enforcement." His hand moved to rest on his security radio, a clear threat. At that moment, Maya's phone buzzed. It was a message from Chicago General Hospital. "Patient's condition worsening. Surgery needs to be moved up. Please confirm arrival time." The stakes were getting higher with each wasted minute. Sandra, who had not left despite Wells' dismissal, tried again. "Mr. Wells, please just look at our client wall. Dr. Richardson's photo is right there with other jet owners." She pointed to a wall 20 feet away where photographs of regular clients were displayed. "I don't need to look at anything," Wells snapped. "I know what I'm seeing right here." His meaning was clear to everyone watching. He had made assumptions about Maya based solely on her race, and no amount of evidence seemed enough to change his mind. Maya took another deep breath, thinking about her patient in Chicago. She couldn't afford to lose her composure, but she also couldn't waste more time. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. "Hello, this is Dr. Maya Richardson." She spoke into the phone, her voice clear and firm. "I need to speak with Mr. Davidson, the terminal manager, immediately. It's urgent." She had never had to call the manager before. In 5 years of flying from this terminal, she had never faced such discrimination. Wells' face showed the first hint of uncertainty as he heard Maya mention the manager's name. Behind him, Sandra nodded encouragingly, relief visible on her face. Other passengers had moved closer, some shaking their heads in disapproval at Wells' behavior. Through the terminal windows, the sun had almost completely set, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. Maya's pilot, Captain Wilson, appeared at the tarmac door, looking confused about the delay. He spotted Maya at the security desk and started walking over, his face showing concern as he noticed the tense situation. The terminal's atmosphere was now charged with anticipation. Wells still stood firm, but his earlier confidence seemed to be cracking. Maya kept her phone to her ear, her other hand still resting on her documents. In her mind, she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been judged unfairly, for every professional who had their credentials questioned because of their appearance. Mr. Davidson, the terminal manager, arrived within minutes of Maya's call. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing a dark suit and a concerned expression. As soon as he walked through the door and saw Maya standing at the security desk, his face changed from worry to embarrassment. "Dr. Richardson," he called out, walking quickly toward them. "What on earth is going on here?" Behind his desk, Thomas Wells suddenly stood straighter, the color beginning to drain from his face. Before Maya could answer, Captain Wilson reached them from the tarmac entrance. "Dr. Richardson, we're already 20 minutes behind schedule," he said, checking his watch. "Chicago General has called twice about tomorrow's surgery." Mr. Davidson's eyes widened at the mention of the surgery. He turned to Wells, his expression now stern. "Mr. Wells, do you realize who you've been detaining? This is Dr. Maya Richardson. She's not just a client. She's one of our most important jet owners and a leading neurosurgeon. Wells stammered. Sir, I was just following security protocols. She doesn't look like. Doesn't look like what, Mr. Wells? Davidson cut him off sharply. The growing crowd of passengers watched intently, many still recording with their phones. Sandra Chen stood nearby, shaking her head in disappointment. Maya's phone buzzed again. Another message from Chicago General. Patient's family requesting update on your arrival time. Condition critical. The reality of what this delay might cost weighed heavily on her mind. Mr. Davidson, Maya spoke calmly, though her heart was racing. I appreciate your intervention, but right now my priority is getting to Chicago. I have a 16-year-old patient waiting for emergency surgery. Every minute we waste here. Davidson immediately sprang into action. Of course, Dr. Richardson. Please, proceed to your aircraft immediately. He turned to Sandra. Ms. Chen, please escort Dr. Richardson to her jet. Then he faced Wells again, his voice cold. Mr. Wells, my office. Now. As Maya gathered her documents, another executive walked past the security desk. Wells automatically started to wave him through without checking any ID. The contrast was stark and obvious to everyone watching. Actually, Maya paused, turning back. Mr. Davidson, I'd like to discuss implementing better training programs here. What happened today, it shouldn't happen to anyone else. Even in this tense moment, she was thinking about creating positive change. Captain Wilson gently touched her arm. Dr. Richardson, we really need to go. Chicago's weather is getting worse, and we have a tight window for landing. The crowd of observers had grown larger. Many were business leaders who regularly used the terminal, and they watched the scene with obvious disapproval. Some were already on their phones, likely sharing what they'd witnessed on social media. As Sandra led Maya toward the tarmac doors, they could hear Mr. Davidson beginning to reprimand Wells. In 15 years of managing this terminal, I have never been so embarrassed by an employee's behavior. Walking across the tarmac, Maya finally let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The cool evening air felt good on her face. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I'm so sorry, Dr. Richardson, Sandra said softly as they walked. Your mother's surgery last year. You didn't ask for any special treatment then, even though you owned a jet and were so important. You just helped us like any other patient. Maya managed a small smile. We're all just people, Sandra. That's what some folks still need to learn. She checked her phone one more time. Another message from Chicago waited. Reaching the jet's stairs, Maya turned to Sandra. Thank you for trying to help back there. Sometimes speaking up is the bravest thing we can do. She climbed aboard quickly, her mind already shifting to the surgery ahead. As the jet's door closed, Maya could see terminal staff gathering around Mr. Davidson, who was still talking sternly to Wells. Through the window, she noticed several passengers showing their phone recordings to others. What had started as one guard's prejudiced actions would soon become something much bigger, but right now, she had a life to save in Chicago. High above the clouds, Maya sat in her jet's comfortable leather seat, trying to focus on her patient's medical files. The cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines. Captain Wilson had them cruising at 40,000 feet, making up for lost time as they headed toward Chicago. Dr. Richardson, the flight attendant, Jennifer, approached with a cup of tea. I heard about what happened at the terminal. Are you okay? Her voice was gentle with concern. Maya accepted the tea with a tired smile. I'm fine, Jennifer. My patient. She looked down at her phone, reading the latest update from Chicago General. The 16-year-old patient, Sarah Chen, no relation to Sandra from the terminal, had a rare brain tumor that was pressing on critical areas. Only a handful of surgeons in the country could perform the necessary procedure. The incident at the terminal had already gone viral. Maya's phone kept buzzing with notifications. The videos taken by other passengers were spreading rapidly across social media platforms. News outlets were trying to contact her for comments. But Maya's mind was elsewhere, on Sarah, the teenage girl waiting for her in Chicago. Captain Wilson's voice came over the intercom. Dr. Richardson, I coordinated with Chicago Air Traffic Control. They're giving us priority landing due to the medical emergency. We should make up most of our lost time. Looking out the window at the dark sky, Maya remembered another young patient from years ago. Back then, she had also faced discrimination, a patient's family requesting a different surgeon because they didn't trust a black woman with such a delicate procedure. Maya had performed the surgery anyway, saving the patient's life. The family had later apologized, their prejudices overcome by gratitude. Jennifer returned with some light dinner. The hospital called again. They're preparing the operating room for your arrival. She hesitated, then added, My sister works at Chicago General. She says you're the best neurosurgeon they've ever had. Maya barely touched her food, her mind reviewing the complex procedure ahead. The tumor's location made it particularly challenging. One wrong move could affect Sarah's ability to speak or move. The surgery would require perfect concentration. She couldn't let the terminal incident distract her. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Mr. Davidson. Dr. Richardson, I want to personally apologize again. Wells has been suspended pending a full investigation. We're implementing immediate changes to our security training. Please let me know when you'd be willing to discuss your suggestions for improvement. The jet encountered some turbulence, making Maya's tea ripple in its cup. Captain Wilson's voice came through again. Sorry about the bumps, Doc. Storm system ahead, but we're adjusting our route. Still on track for Chicago. Maya closed her eyes, remembering Sarah's initial consultation. The girl was a talented young pianist, dreaming of attending Juilliard. Her tumor threatened not just her life, but her future dreams. That's what Wells and his prejudices had nearly jeopardized. Not just Maya's time, but a young girl's chance at life. Opening her laptop, Maya began typing. Even at this height, with the darkness outside her window and a critical surgery ahead, she was drafting proposals. Ideas for better training programs, suggestions for systemic changes in private aviation security, plans for mentorship programs. The discrimination she'd faced wouldn't be wasted, it would become a catalyst for change. Jennifer appeared one more time. We're starting our descent soon, Dr. Richardson. There's a medical team waiting at the airport to escort you directly to the hospital. Maya nodded, gathering her materials. The city lights of Chicago were appearing in the distance, twinkling like earthbound stars. In 3 hours, she would be in surgery, doing what she did best, saving lives. The security guard's prejudice had tried to delay her, but it hadn't stopped her. It never would. As the jet began its descent, Maya said a silent prayer for steady hands and clear focus. Tomorrow's headlines might be about discrimination at an airport terminal, but tonight was about Sarah Chen and her future. That's where Maya's real power lay, not in confronting prejudice, but in rising above it to serve others. The emergency room entrance at Chicago General Hospital was bright with flashing lights as Maya's police escort arrived. It was just past midnight, and a team of medical staff was waiting outside despite the cold. Dr. James Chen, the hospital's chief of surgery, rushed forward to meet her. Dr. Richardson, thank God you're here, he said, walking quickly beside her as they entered the hospital. Sarah's pressure is increasing. We need to operate immediately. His face showed both relief at her arrival and worry about the patient's condition. Maya moved swiftly through the familiar hospital corridors, her mind now completely focused on the task ahead. The terminal incident felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Here, in these halls, she wasn't a black woman who had faced discrimination. She was simply a surgeon with a life to save. In the pre-op room, Sarah's parents stood up as Maya entered. Mrs. Chen had tears in her eyes, while Mr. Chen held his wife's hand tightly. Their daughter, Sarah, lay on the bed, her long black hair already shaved for the surgery. Despite her condition, the teenager managed a weak smile. Dr. Richardson, Sarah whispered, her voice shaky but hopeful. I watched videos of you playing piano last week. After this surgery, will I still be able to play? Her fingers moved slightly, as if touching invisible piano keys. Maya approached the bed, her voice gentle but confident. That's exactly why I'm here, Sarah. I'm going to do everything I can to protect your gift. She didn't mention that she'd fought through prejudice and delays to be here. That wasn't what her patient needed to hear. The operating room was already prepared, the surgical team waiting. Maya looked at the brain scans displayed on the wall screens. The tumor was exactly where she'd expected, but the pressure had increased since the last images. They had no time to waste. As Maya scrubbed in, she could hear the TV in the doctor's lounge. A news channel was showing the videos from the LAX private terminal. Her confrontation with Wells had become breaking news. But here, with soap up to her elbows and her surgical mask in place, none of that mattered. Scalpel, Maya called out 15 minutes later, standing over Sarah's draped form. The operating room fell silent, except for the steady beep of monitors. This was her element, where skill and dedication trumped everything else. Hour after hour, Maya worked with intense concentration. Her hands moved with precise grace, navigating through the delicate tissues of Sarah's brain. The tumor was tricky, wrapped around areas controlling motor skills and artistic ability. One small mistake could end the girl's dreams of becoming a pianist. Pressures dropping, a nurse announced at the 4-hour mark. "Looking good, Dr. Richardson." The team had been standing for hours, but no one showed any sign of fatigue. They'd all knew what was at stake. Maya thought about her own journey as she carefully removed the last piece of tumor. How many obstacles had she faced to reach this position? How many Thomas Wells had tried to stand in her way? Yet here she was, doing what she was meant to do. "Final scan," she ordered, stepping back to check the images. The screens showed success. The tumor was gone, and the vital areas were undamaged. Sarah would play piano again. Walking up to speak with the Chen family, Maya felt the exhaustion hitting her. She had been awake for over 24 hours, dealing with everything from prejudice guards to life-saving surgery. But seeing the joy and relief on the parents' faces made it all worthwhile. "She's going to be fine," Maya told them, smiling as Mrs. Chen burst into tears of happiness. The surgery was successful, and yes, she'll be able to play piano again. As the family hugged each other, Maya's phone buzzed once more. The terminal incident was still making headlines, but she had just written a different kind of headline in this operating room, one of hope, skill, and the triumph of human spirit over prejudice. The morning sun was rising over Chicago as Maya finally sat down in the doctor's lounge. She had just finished checking on Sarah, who was recovering well in the ICU. The teenager had squeezed her hand and moved her fingers in a piano-playing motion, a beautiful sign that her motor skills were intact. Dr. Chen brought Maya a cup of coffee and pointed to the TV on the wall. The morning news was showing the airport incident again, but now with a different angle. The headline read, "Renowned neurosurgeon racially profiled at LAX, rushed to save teen's life." "You're trending on every social media platform," Dr. Chen said, sitting beside her. "The videos have millions of views. People are angry about what happened to you." Maya took a sip of her coffee, watching the footage. Seeing herself standing calmly at that security desk while Wells dismissed her credentials brought back fresh emotions. But the story didn't end there. The news was now showing clips of her arriving at Chicago General, rushing to save Sarah's life. Her phone had hundreds of missed calls and messages. The hospital's PR department was being flooded with interview requests. Civil rights organizations wanted to speak with her, but one message caught her eye. It was from Thomas Wells himself. "Dr. Richardson," his message read, "I am deeply sorry for my inexcusable behavior. Watching the news about the life you saved, the life I almost prevented you from saving, I have no words. I'd like to speak with you, if you're willing." Sandra Chen from the LAX terminal had also messaged, "Dr. Richardson, the changes are already starting here." Mr. Davidson fired Wells, but Wells asked to speak to him first. He admitted his prejudices and requested a chance to help create new training programs instead. Maya stood up and walked to the ICU window, watching Sarah sleep peacefully. The girl's parents were beside her bed, their faces showing pure relief and gratitude. They'd had no idea about the drama that had almost prevented Maya from reaching their daughter in time. A group of young medical students, mostly minorities, gathered nervously at the lounge entrance. One of them, a black female student, stepped forward. "Dr. Richardson, we saw the news. What you did, standing up to that guard, then coming here to save that girl, you're our hero." Maya smiled warmly at them. "Come in," she said, gesturing to the empty seats. As they sat down, their faces full of admiration and hope, she realized this incident could be more than just another story of discrimination. It could be a turning point. Dr. Chen returned with more coffee and a stack of papers. "The hospital board just called an emergency meeting. They want to start a new mentorship program for minority medical students. They're asking if you'd lead it. Looking at the young students, Maya thought about all the barriers she had faced in her career. How many talented doctors had given up because of discrimination? How many lives could have been saved if prejudice hadn't stood in their way? Her phone buzzed again. Mr. Davidson from LX. Dr. Richardson, we're implementing comprehensive changes. Wells came forward with a proposal. He wants to work with civil rights organizations to reform security training across all private terminals. Would you consider being an advisor? The young medical students were still watching her, waiting to hear her thoughts. In their eyes, Maya saw the future of medicine, a future that needed to be more inclusive, more fair, more focused on saving lives than judging appearances. You know, Maya said to them, sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the best opportunities for change. That guard tried to stop me because of how I looked, but look what's happening now. New training programs, mentorship opportunities, real systemic changes. She picked up her phone to reply to the messages, her decision made. This incident wouldn't be buried or forgotten. It would become a catalyst for transformation, not just in private aviation, but in medicine too. Sometimes, the best response to discrimination wasn't anger or revenge. It was positive, lasting change. 1 month after the incident, Maya stood at the front of a large conference room at LAX's private terminal. The room was filled with security staff from various airports across the country. In the back row sat Thomas Wells, looking very different from the man who had tried to stop her that evening. Change starts with understanding, Maya said to the group, her voice clear and strong. What happened here last month could have ended badly. A teenage girl could have lost her life because of unchecked prejudice. But instead, we're turning it into something positive. Wells raised his hand to speak, something he had asked permission to do before the session. Maya nodded, and he stood up, facing his colleagues. I was wrong that day, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I almost caused a tragedy. But Dr. Richardson showed me a better way. The training program they had developed together was already showing results. Security staff were learning about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of following proper verification procedures for all passengers, regardless of their appearance. After the session, Maya checked her phone. There was a video message from Sarah Chen, now back home and recovering well. The teenager was sitting at her piano, her fingers moving smoothly across the keys, playing a beautiful piece by Chopin. The surgery had been a complete success. Dr. Richardson, Sarah's mother, had written beneath the video, "You didn't just save her life, you saved her dreams. We'll never forget what you went through to reach her that night." Maya's next stop was Chicago General Hospital, where she was launching the new mentorship program. 20 young medical students from minority backgrounds had been selected for the first group. They would receive training, support, and opportunities they might not have had otherwise. Your story inspired me to keep going, one student told her during the orientation. I almost quit medical school last year after facing discrimination, but seeing how you handled that guard, then went straight to save a life, it showed me what's possible. The changes were spreading beyond medicine and aviation. Other industries were reaching out, asking Maya to help develop similar training programs. Companies were examining their own security procedures, looking for hidden biases that needed to be addressed. Even Thomas Wells had found a new purpose. After completing the training program himself, he had become one of its most passionate advocates. He now traveled to other airports, sharing his story as an example of how prejudice could be overcome through education and understanding. Dr. Richardson, he said, catching up with her after the training session, my grandson started medical school this year. He says he wants to be like you, not just skilled at his job, but brave enough to stand up and make changes when things are wrong. Maya smiled, remembering the night that had started all of this. Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest impact, she told him. What matters is not that we make mistakes, but how we learn from them. Later that evening, Maya stood at the same security desk where the incident had happened. Sandra Chen was there, proudly showing her the wall of honor they had created. It displayed photos and stories of various professionals who had faced discrimination but persevered to achieve their dreams. We've had 0 incidents since the new training program started, Sandra reported happily. And applications from minority candidates for our aviation programs have doubled. Maya's phone buzzed with another message. One of her mentees had just been accepted into a prestigious surgery residency program. Small changes were adding up to big transformations, one person at a time. Looking out at the sunset through the terminal's windows, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The guard who had tried to stop her had actually helped her start something powerful. Sometimes, she realized, the best response to discrimination wasn't to fight back or give up. It was to rise above and create lasting change. 1 year had passed since the night at LAX's private terminal. Maya sat in the front row of Chicago's largest concert hall, watching with tears in her eyes as Sarah Chen performed her solo piano piece at her high school graduation. The teenager's fingers moved perfectly across the keys, playing the same Chopin piece she had practiced during her recovery. After the performance, Sarah ran down from the stage to hug Maya. "I got in," she whispered excitedly. "Juilliard accepted me, and it's all because you saved my ability to play that night." Maya smiled, remembering the urgent flight and surgery that had preserved this young girl's dreams. In the audience, she spotted Thomas Wells, who had flown in specially for the concert. He was no longer the prejudiced guard who had tried to stop her. He had become one of her strongest allies in fighting discrimination. "The new training program has been adopted by 50 major airports now," Wells told her after the concert. "We trained over 2,000 security staff. Your story changed everything. It changed me." Later that week, Maya returned to LAX's private terminal for a special ceremony. The terminal was crowded with aviation professionals, medical students, and media representatives. Mr. Davidson stood at the podium, speaking proudly about the changes of the past year. "Today, we're not just celebrating success stories," he announced. "We're celebrating a complete transformation in how we think about security, respect, and human dignity. And it all started right here, at this terminal." The wall that once displayed client photos now featured something new, the Richardson Rule. Like the NFL's Rooney Rule, but for aviation security, it required terminals to implement comprehensive anti-bias training and fair treatment protocols. The initiative had spread across the country, affecting thousands of lives. Maya's mentorship program at Chicago General had also grown beyond expectations. 30 of her first group of medical students were now starting their residencies at top hospitals. More importantly, they were carrying forward the lessons they had learned about courage, perseverance, and turning negative experiences into positive change. Dr. Richardson, one of her mentees, said during the ceremony, "You showed us that our biggest obstacles can become our greatest opportunities to make a difference." Sandra Chen, still working at the terminal, had been promoted to head of customer relations. She had helped design many of the new training programs, ensuring they addressed real-world situations with practical solutions. "Remember that night?" Sandra asked Maya quietly. "Who would have thought that one guard's prejudice would lead to all of this?" The ceremony included a surprise video message from Sarah Chen, playing piano at Juilliard's practice room. "Dr. Richardson didn't just save my life and my dreams," Sarah said in the video. "She showed us all how to face discrimination with dignity and create positive change." Maya looked around the terminal, noticing how different it felt now. The security desk where she had faced prejudice had become a symbol of transformation. New signs clearly displayed security protocols that applied equally to everyone. The staff was noticeably more diverse. "Your mother would have been proud," Dr. Chen said, standing beside her. He had flown in from Chicago for the ceremony. "You turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change." As Maya stepped up to the podium to give her speech, she saw Thomas Wells in the audience, sitting beside some of her medical students. The former guard who had tried to stop her was now teaching others about overcoming prejudice. "1 year ago, I stood at this terminal and faced discrimination," Maya began. "But today, we're not here to dwell on that moment. We're here to celebrate how far we've come and plan how much further we can go. Because sometimes, the worst moments in our lives become catalysts for the best changes." She looked out at the diverse crowd, seeing hope and determination in their faces. "This isn't just my story anymore," she concluded. "It's our story. A story of how one incident of prejudice led to a wave of positive change. And we're not finished yet. We're just getting started."